There is a powerful moment in relationships that many people misunderstand. Most believe that if someone they love starts pulling away, the solution is to chase harder, call more, text more, and fight to keep the connection alive. But the truth is that approach often pushes the other person even further away. Real strength shows up in a different way. Sometimes the most powerful move you can make is not shouting, not arguing, and not begging someone to stay. The most powerful move is walking away peacefully. No drama, no emotional explosion, just quiet dignity. And here's the interesting part about human psychology. When someone walks away with calm confidence, it creates a reaction, especially in men, not because they suddenly changed overnight, but because your peaceful exit forces them to see something they didn't notice before. Value. You see, when a man feels like he always has access to you, your attention, your time, your energy, he can start to take that presence for granted. Not necessarily because he is a bad person, but because familiarity often hides value. When something is always there, people stop noticing how important it really is. But the moment that presence disappears, everything changes. The quiet space you leave behind becomes a mirror. Suddenly he begins to remember the conversations, the laughter, the support, the comfort you brought into his life. The silence begins speaking louder than any argument ever could. Walking away peacefully is not about playing games. It is about protecting your self-respect and allowing reality to do the teaching. And when that happens, something very interesting begins to unfold. The man who once seemed distant, the man who once took his time, the man who once took his time, the man who once seemed unsure, now starts moving, not because you forced him to, but because he finally understands what he might lose. When you walk away peacefully, you stop convincing, you stop chasing, and instead, you allow your value to speak for itself. And that is often the exact moment when he starts chasing you again. One of the most powerful things a person can do in a relationship is something that seems very simple on the surface, but carries deep psychological impact: emotional detachment. This doesn't mean becoming cold, bitter, or uncaring. Emotional detachment simply means you stop allowing your emotions to control your actions when someone is not valuing you the way they should. It means you regain control of yourself. Many people think that when a relationship starts slipping away, the solution is to hold tighter. They start calling more, texting more, explaining more, and trying harder to prove their love. In their mind, they believe that showing more effort will fix the situation. But human psychology doesn't always work that way. In fact, when someone feels overwhelmed by constant emotional pressure, it often pushes them further away. This is where emotional detachment becomes powerful. When you calmly step back instead of chasing, you change the entire emotional dynamic of the relationship. Suddenly, the pressure disappears. The drama disappears. The arguments stop. Instead of reacting emotionally, you respond with calm control. And that calmness is what creates curiosity. You see, when a man expects emotional reactions, anger, begging, long messages, constant questions, and those reactions suddenly disappear, it creates confusion. He starts wondering what changed. He starts noticing the silence. And silence in many situations speaks louder than words. Think about it this way. When someone is always explaining themselves, defending their love, and trying to prove their importance, they unintentionally lower their perceived value. It starts to look like they are trying to convince the other person to stay. But when someone steps back with quiet confidence, the message becomes very different. The message becomes, I know my worth. This kind of energy commands respect without saying a single word. Men, like most people, naturally respect strength, not aggressive strength, not loud strength, but emotional strength. The strength to remain calm when things get difficult, the strength to walk away from situations that do not honor your value. When a woman chooses emotional detachment instead of emotional chaos, she shows something very rare. She shows that her happiness does not depend entirely on someone else's behavior. She shows that she is capable of loving somewhat deeply, but she will not lose herself in the process. That realization can be very powerful, because when someone sees that you are not desperate for their attention, they begin to question their own behavior. They begin to ask themselves why the energy has changed. They begin to reflect on what they may have been taking for granted. And reflection is the first step toward pursuit. Another important part of emotional detachment is the way it restores balance. In many relationships where one person starts chasing, the power dynamic becomes uneven. One person becomes the pursuer, and the other becomes the one being pursued. When that happens, the person chasing often feels anxious and insecure, while the other person feels comfortable taking their time. But when emotional detachment enters the picture, the balance shifts again. You stop running towards someone who is walking away. Instead, you stand still. And when you stand still, the person who is walking away suddenly realizes the distance between you is growing. That is when many people turn around. Not because you begged them to come back, but because your calm distance made them notice the space. Emotional detachment also protects your dignity. Relationships should never require someone to sacrifice their self-respect just to keep another person interested. If someone only stays when you constantly fight for their attention, that connection is built on unstable ground. Healthy attraction often grows when both people feel respected and valued. When you detach emotionally from unhealthy patterns, arguments, chasing, over-explaining, you allow the relationship to reset. You stop feeding negative cycles and instead create a quieted environment where clarity can appear. Clarity is something many people do not experience when emotions are constantly running high. Arguments cloud judgment, desperation creates pressure, but distance allows people to think clearly. And when someone finally has space to think, they often begin to realize things they ignored before. They remember the support you gave them during difficult moments. They remember the loyalty you showed when things were uncertain. They remember the peace your presence brought into their life. But they only start recognizing those things once the noise is gone. That is the paradox of emotional detachment. When you stop trying to prove your value often becomes more visible. It's important to understand that emotional detachment is not manipulation. It is not about playing games or trying to control someone's emotions. It is about protecting your own emotional health and refusing to participate in patterns that diminish your self-worth. You are not walking away to make someone suffer. You are walking away because you understand that love should not require constant persuasion. And strangely enough, that quiet confidence often becomes the very thing that brings someone back. When a man sees that you are calm, composed, and still moving forward with your life, it sends a powerful signal. It shows that your world does not revolve around chasing someone who is unsure about you. It shows strength. And strength is attractive. In the end, emotional detachment is less about making someone chase you and more about reclaiming control over your own peace. You stop reacting emotionally to every situation, and instead you respond with wisdom and self-respect. And when you do that, something interesting happens. The person who once felt comfortable drifting away suddenly starts paying attention again, not because you demanded it, but because your quiet strength made them realize what they might be losing. One of the most important psychological truths in relationships is this: people tend to value what feels difficult to replace. This does not mean love should be a competition or that affection should be withheld as a strategy. But human nature has a pattern. When something is always available, always forgiven, and always present no matter what happens, people can slowly begin to take it for granted. This happens in many relationships without anyone even realizing it. At the beginning, everything feels exciting. A man pays attention to every detail. He listens carefully. He makes time. He shows effort, and he tries to impress you. During this stage, he sees you as someone special, someone valuable, someone he does not want to lose. But over time, if he begins to feel that your presence in his life is guaranteed no matter what he does, his sense of urgency can fade. Again, this is not always because he intentionally wants to hurt someone. Sometimes it is simply the way familiarity changes perception. Where something feels permanent, people relax their effort. They assume the person will always be there. They assume the love will always be available. They assume the connection cannot disappear. And that assumption is where the shift begins. When a woman continues giving her time, energy, and emotional support while receiving less and less effort in return, the balance of value slowly becomes distorted. The more she tries to prove her love, the less he feels the need to prove his. But something powerful happens when she stops overextending herself. When she calmly walks away or pulls back without anger or drama, the dynamic changes in a way many people do not expect. The man who once felt comfortable with the situation suddenly experiences something unfamiliar: scarcity. Scarcity changes perception almost instantly. When something valuable becomes less available, the mind begins to reevaluate its importance. This principle exists in many areas of life. People often desire things more when they realize those things are no longer guaranteed. The same psychological principle can apply in relationships. When your attention, affection, and presence are no longer constantly available, a man begins to see the relationship from a different angle. The comfort he once felt is replaced by uncertainty. He starts noticing the silence where your messages used to be. He starts noticing the absence of your emotional support. He starts noticing the empty spaces where your energy once existed, and that absence can create reflection. Suddenly, he remembers the conversations that made him laugh. He remembers the encouragement you gave when he was facing challenges. He remembers the way you believed in him, even when he doubted himself. These memories begin to gain importance because the source of them is no longer easily accessible. This is why people often say that absence can reveal value. When something disappears from daily life, the mind starts replaying the moments that once felt ordinary. The laughter, the kindness, the loyalty, the understanding, all the things that quietly supported the relationship suddenly become visible. When you are always present, those qualities can blend into the background of everyday life. But when you step away, they stand out. A man may begin to compare his current emotional environment with the one he experienced when you were fully present. And often he realizes that the peace, comfort, and stability you provided were more significant than he originally understood. This realization can trigger something powerful inside him. The fear of losing something valuable. Fear of loss is one of the strongest motivators in human behavior. When people believe they might lose something meaningful, they often begin to act with urgency. They start reaching out. They start asking questions. They start wondering whether the door they once took for granted might now be closing. This is where pursuit often begins. But it is important to understand that this process only works when the distance comes from genuine self-respect. If someone walks away while constantly checking, waiting, and hoping for immediate reactions, the energy still feels like chasing. True power comes from shifting your focus back to your own life. You invest in your goals. You reconnect with your passions. You continue building your happiness without waiting for someone else's attention to validate your work. When a man sees that you are moving forward confidently, something inside him often begins to change. The person he once assumed would always remain available now appears independent and emotionally strong. And independence is deeply attractive. It signals that you are not defined by the relationship alone. It shows that you have a full life, a sense of purpose, and a strong identity outside of anyone else's approval. For many men, this realization creates a new level of respect. Instead of seeing you as someone who needs constant reassurance, he begins to see you as someone who chooses to love rather than someone who depends on love. That difference is significant. People value choices more than obligations. Where someone stays because they want to, not because they feel they have no other option, their presence becomes far more meaningful. By stepping away from situations where your effort is not matched, you send a quiet but powerful message. You show that your love is valuable, your time is valuable, and your emotional energy is not something that will be endlessly given without appreciation. And when someone finally recognizes that value, the entire dynamic of the relationship can change. The man who once felt comfortable taking his time may begin putting in real effort again. The one who seemed distant may start showing curiosity about your life again. Not because you forced him, not because you argued with him, but because your absence reminded him that something meaningful was never meant to be taken for granted. When someone realizes that a person who brought peace, loyalty, and genuine connection into their life might no longer be easily reachable, they often begin to move. And that movement is what people often describe as chasing. It begins with a simple realization. Some people are easy to find, but the ones who truly add value to your life are not so easy to replace. One of the most powerful forces in human psychology is silence. In relationships, people often believe that the way to solve problems is by talking more, explaining more, arguing more, and constantly trying to fix every emotional gap with words. But there are moments when words lose their power and silence becomes a teacher. Silence creates reflection. When emotions are running high, people rarely think clearly. During arguments, both individuals are usually focused on defending themselves, proving their point, or reacting emotionally to what the other person says. In that state, very little real understanding takes place. The conversation becomes noise rather than communication. But when silence enters the situation, the noise disappears. And when the noise disappears, The mind finally has space to think. This is one of the reasons why walking away peacefully can create such a powerful impact. When someone expects confrontation, emotional messages, or constant attempts to reconnect, the absence of those reactions creates a very different emotional environment. Instead of being distracted by arguments or long conversations, a man is left alone with his own thoughts. And that is where reflection begins. You see, when someone is constantly explaining their feelings, trying to convince another person to understand them, the focus often stays on the conversation itself. The other person reacts in the moment, sometimes defensively, sometimes dismissively, but rarely with deep reflection. However, silence removes the immediate reaction. There is no debate to win. There is no emotional pressure to escape. There is simply space. In that space, memories begin to surface. The mind starts replaying moments from the relationship that once felt ordinary. Conversations that were once routine begin to feel meaningful. Small gestures that were once unnoticed begin to stand out. A man may start remembering how you supported him during stressful times. He may remember the way you listened when he needed someone to talk to. He may remember the comfort of your presence after a difficult day. These reflections often appear slowly, not all at once. At first, the silence may simply feel strange. He may notice that the phone is quieter, the conversations are gone. The emotional energy that once filled his daily routine has disappeared. Then curiosity begins to grow. He may start wondering what you were doing. He may start asking himself why the connection feels different now. The absence of your voice becomes noticeable in ways that constant communication never allowed. That curiosity gradually turns into deeper thought. When someone is no longer distracted by arguments or emotional tension, they begin to evaluate the situation more honestly. They start asking questions they may have ignored before. Did I take this person for granted? Did I fail to appreciate what they brought into my life? Was I too comfortable assuming they would always stay? These questions can create a powerful internal conversation. Silence acts like a mirror. It forces people to face their own behavior without the distraction of external reaction. When there is no one arguing back, no one trying to prove a point, a person must confront their own thoughts and feelings, and sometimes those thoughts lead to regret. Regret is a strong emotional motivator. When someone begins to realize that they may have overlooked something meaningful, the desire to correct that mistake can grow quickly. But this process only happens when silence is genuine. If someone says they are stepping away but continue sending messages, checking constantly, or reacting emotionally to every small interaction, the silence never truly exists. The reflection cannot begin because the noise is still present. True silence is calm. It is not passive aggression. It is not punishment. It is simply the decision to stop participating in emotional chaos. When you stop arguing, stop explaining, and stop chasing, the relationship enters a different phase. Instead of forcing understanding through constant communication, you allow the other person to discover their own understanding. This discovery is much more powerful than anything someone else can explain. People often believe conclusions they reach themselves far more strongly than conclusions someone else tries to convince them of. If you constantly tell someone that you are valuable, they may resist the idea. But if silence allows them to realize your value on their own, that realization becomes much deeper and more lasting. Silence also changes the emotional balance of the relationship. When someone expects constant communication and suddenly that communication disappears, they become more aware of the emotional space you once filled. Your absence becomes noticeable in everyday moments. Maybe he reaches for his phone out of habit and realizes there is no message waiting. Maybe he experiences something during the day that he would normally share with you, but now the conversation is no longer there. These small moments accumulate. Over time, they remind him of how integrated you were in his life, and that realization often leads to action. A man who begins reflecting deeply on a relationship may start feeling the urge to reconnect, not because someone pressured him to do so, but because the silence gave him time to understand what he might lose. This is why silence can be more powerful than long explanations. Words can sometimes be ignored or dismissed during emotional situations, but silence cannot be argued with. It cannot be interrupted. It simply exists, creating the space necessary for honest thought. In many cases, that quiet space becomes the moment when someone truly understands the value of a relationship. They begin to see the difference between temporary comfort and genuine connection. They start recognizing the emotional support they once received. And most importantly, they begin realizing that the person who once brought that support into their life may not always remain available. That realization can awaken something inside them, because when silence gives someone the chance to truly reflect, it often leads to a simple but powerful conclusion. Some people only recognize the importance of a voice once the room becomes quiet without it. Self-respect is one of the most powerful qualities a person can carry into any relationship. It is quiet, it is steady, and it does not need constant validation from others to exist. When someone truly respects themselves, their actions reflect a certain level of dignity that people around them can feel, even if it is never spoken aloud. In relationships, self-respect becomes especially important when challenges appear. There are moments when someone may start giving less effort, less attention, or less emotional presence. Many people respond to this shift by trying harder to hold a connection together. They give more time, more patience, more explanations, hoping that their increased effort will restore the balance. But sometimes doing more only hides an important truth. When effort is constantly one-sided, the relationship begins to lose its natural balance. One person becomes the giver, the one always trying to fix things, while the other person becomes comfortable receiving without contributing the same energy. Over time, this pattern can quietly erode respect, not because love is gone, but because the dynamic has changed. Self-respect interrupts this pattern. When a woman chooses to protect her dignity instead of chasing someone who is pulling away, she sends a powerful message without needing to speak loudly. She shows that her love is genuine, but it is not desperate. She shows that she values the relationship, but she values herself as well. This balance is extremely important. Love should never require someone to abandon their self-worth. When a person stays in situations where their effort is ignored or their presence is taken for granted, they slowly teach others that their boundaries can be crossed without consequence. But when someone calmly steps away from disrespectful or unbalanced situations, the message changes immediately. The message becomes clear. My presence in your life is a privilege, not a guarantee. This kind of quiet confidence often creates a strong reaction, not because it is dramatic, but because it is rare. Many people are used to emotional reactions, arguments, pleading, long explanations, repeated attempts to fix things. Those reactions are common, and because they are common, they often lose their impact. Self-respect, on the other hand, is calm. It does not chase. It does not beg. It simply refuses to remain where it is not valued. When a man sees that a woman is capable of walking away peacefully, rather than accepting less than she deserves, something inside him begins to shift. The dynamic he may have grown comfortable with suddenly disappears. Instead of feeling like he has unlimited time to decide how he wants to behave, he realizes that the opportunity to be part of your life is not endless. This realization can trigger a new level of awareness. He begins to see you differently. The woman he once assumed would always stay now appears strong, independent, and emotionally grounded. Instead of seeing someone who depends on his attention for happiness, he sees someone who can continue living confidently with or without his approval. That kind of strength commands respect. Respect is one of the foundations of long-term attraction. When someone respects you, they begin to value your opinions, your boundaries, and your emotional well-being more seriously. Without respect, even the strongest feelings can eventually weaken. Self-respect restores that missing foundation. When a woman protects her dignity, she teaches others how they must treat her if they want to remain in her life. She does not need to create long rules or constant reminders. Her actions communicate everything clearly. If someone wants access to her time, they must bring genuine effort. If someone wants her loyalty, they must show consistency. If someone wants her love, they must treat that love with appreciation. This clarity can be incredibly powerful. For many men, realizing that a woman will not tolerate disrespect often creates a renewed desire to pursue her. It changes the way he approaches the relationship. Instead of assuming that her affection will always remain available, he begins to understand that maintaining the connection requires effort, and effort is where pursuit begins. When a man recognizes that the woman he once had easy access to is no longer waiting around, he may start making moves he never made before. He may reach out more sincerely. He may try to rebuild communication. He may begin putting real effort into showing appreciation, not because he was forced, but because he now understands the value of what he almost lost. Self-respect also changes the internal experience of the person who practices it. When you walk away from situations that diminish your worth, you strengthen your own confidence. You remind yourself that your happiness does not depend on convincing someone to stay. This inner strength becomes visible in your behavior. You speak differently. You carry yourself differently. You make decisions based on peace rather than fear. People naturally notice this shift. Confidence that comes from self-respect is deeply attractive because it shows emotional stability. It shows that you are not controlled by desperation or insecurity. Instead, you are guided by a clear understanding of your value. When someone sees that kind of confidence, it often inspires admiration. A man may begin to realize that losing a woman who respects herself means losing someone who brings stability, dignity, and emotional strength into his life. And once that realization takes hold, many men begin to move differently. They begin to chase the opportunity they once treated casually. They begin to invest effort where they once invested comfort. They begin to appreciate what they once assumed would always remain available. All because one person chose self-respect over desperation. In the end, protecting your dignity does more than attract attention from others. It creates a life where your relationships are built on mutual respect rather than imbalance. And when someone sees that you value yourself enough to walk away from anything that diminishes your worth, it often awakens a powerful realization inside them. The strongest attraction does not come from trying to keep someone. It comes from showing that you are strong enough to leave if they fail to value you.